Howdy, and thanks for checking this out. Today, we're going to be talking about bottom hardness, types of bottoms, and it will be less of a focus on side imaging, but mostly just your actual imaging. And then we're going to get into how to make a bottom composition map. Had a fella ask me a question. His name is Brandon. He fishes from a kayak. Took me a while to kind of grasp exactly what he was asking. Not his fault. I was sick. I got into some ordered some bad food, and it got me bad. But anyway, doing fine now. The question was more, is it worth it to get into something that can put together a good bottom composition map? Or should I just kind of wing what I got? Because he understands what he's looking at in real time, which is kind of what I do. Once you learn the sonar and how it works, you just kind of work it in real time. This question is it worth the cost? I would say absolutely. Every now and then I get a question kind of changes my aspect or view on something, and this is one of those questions. Yes, it's worth the cost. He kind of pointed me in the direction of a web seminar by this fella right here, and he's talking about fish highways and how he does these triangle determinations of fish highways. Really neat video. I don't necessarily agree with everything that he's putting out, but he fishes for smallmouth as well. I'm primarily a largemouth fisherman, so he kind of throws out some info that wouldn't necessarily be good for a largemouth guy, but that's fine. It's worth a watch, and for you guys that are starting to make your contour maps, it'll definitely help you out. I did want to throw in this video. I'm gonna cover a book that you need to read. Like, you need to sit down and read this thing. It's worth the money. It'll give you a better look at what you're doing and the aspect of how you're fishing. That particular book, and I'm gonna quote a couple things out of it. It's High Percentage Fishing: A Statistical Approach to Improving Catch Rates by Josh Alwine. Really neat book. Read it once and then read it again. And a lot of you're probably trophy fishermen, so you've probably read that giant bass book, In Pursuit of Giant Bass by Bill Murphy. And that book is not necessarily applicable to, everyone here, but it may be to some people. There's some really good points in that book. I can't fish like him. I have a lot of patience, but I don't have enough patience to do that. I got invited to a tournament. I'm really excited for that one. It's on a private lake that doesn't get fished much, and that's another thing I'm about to kind of hit you up on. So that's going to determine, kind of how you fish the lake, fishing pressure. So before we get too much into the bottom composition, I did want to throw out a couple things, because I want you to catch bigger fish. I want you to have a better time out on the lake, and I want you to catch more, and I want them to be larger, but even just catching more is going to help you out. So one thing that kills me, read this book I'm about to tell you, or the book I just told you about. The moon. There's so many Android and iPhone apps out there that give you good predictions of bass fishing based off the moon. It does not dictate how good the fishing will be or how good you're going to fish that day. So take all that, move it to the side, and forget about it. Also, another thing, the wind. You can catch just as big of a fish or bass in crazy wind as you can. No wind. In fact, I think it was an 8 to 5 mile an hour range at the most that the largest bass were caught. So that's all in the book. It's a fun thing to read. The biggest factor when it comes to fishing is how you, and this lake in particular really calls that out. Fishing pressure. We talked about in the previous video how guys like to come down in this area and beat the bank. It's an easy area to fish. It's very easy to fish. They leave the boat ramp, they come around the corner, and they just beat this bank right here. Fishing pressure. Fishing pressure is the biggest factor you're ever going to fight when it comes to finding that bucket mouth. That is absolutely what it is. Focus on fishing pressure and let that change the way you fish the lake. There's some lakes down in Texas that they're trophy lakes, but most of the trophy fish were caught in around the 12-foot range. Once again, you have bass boats going around the lake all day, all night, fishing that shallow water, beating the banks. If you go out, like, whenever you do go out fishing, pay attention to tournaments that are going on. If a tournament hits a lake, that fishing pressure from the tournament will bring down the amount of fish that you're going to catch. That's guaranteed. It'll also affect it if you know how to fish the lake properly. Let me word that correctly. The areas you like to fish, because we're paying attention to what we're doing here, will also be affected by things like tournaments. So if you're going out and it's just that one night off a week you got and you want to get that trophy fish, and there was a tournament there 12 hours ago, you might want to wait till next week. Although going out, I don't know, maybe you'll get one. So I wanted to kind of point out real quick before we get into how to make this map, read a quick thing out of this book. It says, as a general rule of thumb, the more types of structure and cover you can find in one location, the higher the probability the area will hold fish. John Hope suggested looking for 2 types of structures and 2 types of covers. Hope and Perry agreed structure was the most important factors of the 2. And here's the part that kind of really sends it home. Perry once said, you can find structure without fish, but you cannot find fish without structure. So let me point out something on this lake, and this is just a contour map. This is not a bottom type map yet. We're going to make one. We're going to start a new map project. We're going to make it. But I did want to point out a couple things. If you watched other fellows' videos, we were talking about the triangles and all these other things. What they're really trying to send home are 2 things. Funnels, cover, structure, and multi-directional drop-offs. So we already know from our side scan mosaic that this area is completely covered in structure. It has large rocks, has vegetation growing in between and around the rocks. In this area, let me highlight it. This is what I would call this area right here, a multi-directional drop-off. Why would I do that? Because it drops off and it points to many, many angles of the lake. So, the funnel. What is a funnel? Well, you think about a funnel like you put an oil in the car and you got to pour it in a funnel. A wide mouth that narrows down. So we watch these contour lines that come down, and over here we have the same effect right in this area, and they both lead right to this main structure area that also provides a multi-directional runoff. There's another similar area on the lake. One I did want to point out is near the boat ramp. People don't fish right here. Bad mistake. We have what we could call a funnel, contour lines coming together. There's structure in this area. It's not a bad spot. Less pronounced, but this does contain structure and also a multi-directional runoff. So kind of like a wide funnel in this area, a wide funnel in this area. And for you guys that are fishing the pre-spawn and spawn, your spawning beds, which I'll point out when we make the hardness map, are in these areas that are that kind of match up to it. This is a huge spawning bed. This is kind of that contour area that gives you that stuff. This isn't what I'd call a multi-directional drop-off, but, well, they can go any way they want. So there's probably some lunkers laying in here. There's definitely some in here. We've noted them before, and I think if I go back, I can get one here. I don't know if I'm ever going to visit this lake again, but we're just using it because we do have a lot of data. So let's get into making a hardness map. Create a new map project. I call it hardness. Most people call it bottom type. I'm going to select all our tracks. We're going to export it to map project hardness. You notice they popped up there. I really wish that the program could decide, hey, it's all located in one central area and just zoom in right away. But I understand that there's other people with all sorts of crazy needs with this program, so it's not necessarily going to apply here. I'm going to go ahead and do the just the standard stuff. Define map area. Generate map. I think 65 will do this fella. No, that's fine. I haven't brought in the map boundaries. Import, we're going to go to the aim of shoreline. So now we have that here, but I'm going to select this and I'm going to change it to shoreline. Default mode is island. Boom. So there we go. This is all set up. Now, let's talk a little bit about bottom types. I'm going to kind of shorten this down. Most of you guys, so this is kind of a redundancy thing for most of you. Most of y'all know on your standard sonar, this is your down imaging standard. This is I pick palettes that kind of match what you get on your units. First return and what's below the first return. What do we got going on here? Why is there stuff below it? Well, the sonar has the ability to penetrate through the soil pretty far. Not only that, it generates echoes. Some math wizards figured it all out, and they figured how to put this all on your screen. So let's drive one of these tracks just for a few minutes, or probably not even a few minutes, and kind of identify some things that you're going to see. And once we get to an area where there's some change, I'll show you the different sections within it. Now the reason I picked this palette right here is because some of the cheaper Hummingbird and Lowrance units, this is all you're going to see. I want you to check something out here. There's definitely a separation of these two areas. It doesn't match up necessarily with this, but if you use, your knowledge of the lake and basically, I don't want to say tribal knowledge, but your ability to read it, you can picture what's going on. Okay, so right here, oh man, how did I do that? Right here, we're going to pause it. Your first return, sonar pushing through, and you have a secondary return, and it's pretty representative right here. What's going on? Let's bring up the Reef Master. We'll go to Edit, Bottom Classification. Let's talk about a couple things. You have E1. Actually, that's a bad one. Peak SV. We'll start with Peak SV. This is your initial return. This is where the majority of the sonar data is coming back. So all the sound, the majority of it is coming back off this area right here, which is the peak. So when you're looking at your side imaging, kind of the same thing going on. You can determine, just kind of looking at it, like, hey, this seems to be a slope that it's pretty dense because, well, it's not too dense, but it's decently dense. So there's some mixed rocks and sand in that area. So then we'll talk about E1. E1 is going to be the section between here and here. That's the roughness of the mixture below you. I think they define it as the roughness following the peak, which the peak is the edge. The roughness is the in-between. This, between the edge and that secondary return, I don't know the science behind that one necessarily, but from what I understand, it's some sort of echo. This can help you determine the density of that area. Obviously, the stronger the return, the more dense. So if this was insanely rocky, you're going to have more of a return. So this is kind of like a hard bottom with like a sand mud mixture, and then possibly once we get into the E2, which is going to be this area right here. They call that roughness. It's basically the very bottom of the lake. So this is what's sitting on top of the bottom. This is the actual bottom, or what, like if you dive down there, this is what's going to be the bottom. Your lure is going to be bouncing around this line. This is going to be the roughness, granulated, nasty stuff, and then the actual solid structure area below here. And you can see in this sonar, you don't have any return past this point. So it's probably hard rock. It's probably a solid, large rock. Or a section of, we went over a section of a solid, large rock. So drive just for a bit so you can kind of watch the bottom change. And how does this apply to fishing? We'll get a little bit more into that. Bottom classification allows you to make 4 different types of maps. You have Peak SV, E1, E2, and then an ability to combine them all together. So what's going on right here? That large, heavy structure is going straight down, and there's a huge buildup of sand and other minerals, and then this rough structure, and your very bottom hard return. Hopefully that makes sense. I think that's pretty much enough to get over that. So go ahead. Did I already bring this over? I did not import the tracks. I did. I know I did because I made a contour map. Bottom classification. Active layer. Let's start with peak SV. Now within this area, active layer allows you to choose between composite, which is, for what I understand, it's everything together. Peak SV, which is that first return, gives you an idea of the bottom type. E2, which is a secondary kind of echo area that kind of penetrates down to the bottom, and E1, which is in between peak SV and E2. So peak SV will go average return and returns. You can change the range. There should be. Don't mess with the range. Don't mess with any of this. I read into it, and it's pretty much changing this stuff is like to calibrate. Like if you take sonar from two different units and you gotta like mesh them together. So we get into our peak SV layer. Talk about layers just for a second. Whenever you have a layer, I didn't notice this bar right here at first, and I was like, where is my layer? They're all down here. You can remove your shoreline. You can add your shoreline, add water body, remove your minor contours, bring in your majors. That's pretty neat. You can change the color scheme. Now, a lot of people like the red to kind of light yellow, orange. Is that orange? They like these kinds because you kind of generally think that something is going to be the more red color for denser. I don't like doing that. I'm going to go to gray. Part of the reason I want to do that is because if I export this to something and I decide to go out fishing at night, I don't want bright colors shooting out of my fish finder or my sonar unit, because it's blinding and I like to navigate safely. So we have our hardness. We're going to go ahead and remove that. And we're going to make the next one E2. We're going to make the next one E1. And then we're going to do the composite. So it's all done. I go to layers. So here's something I caught myself doing. I was like, I can't figure out why I can't tell the difference between this. It all looks the same to me. Just kind of learning the software. It's a layer, so you can definitely lay them on top of each other. Go to remove the isobaths, and we'll start with the composite. Go and bring up that mosaic. There should be more. So we're going to compare this to our mosaic. Kind of look at the two together. And we're going to focus on that one area where we noticed the large fish. So I clicked on layers. We look at the contour. We see kind of that funnel area here, funnel area there. We go to the mosaic. Definitely see structure items, large rocks. There's probably something I missed in this area, but there's definitely a few fallen trees within here, probably covered in vegetation. And then I go to my hardness. Make sure our layer stays up. As you can see, it goes from softer, which would be this bottom area, to the rock area. Bring up the SV, which is the peak, the very, when the sonar first hits in the majority of your return, which honestly, if you're bass fishing, that's the way to go, in my opinion. Work our way up, and as you can see, everything gets more dense as we go. So what does this mean? Sometimes you may identify a structure that looks like it's good, but it's just sand. I was recently out at Lake Crystal in Connecticut, Crystal Lake. Awful bass fishing. I actually feel bad for bringing a fella out there, because what was a perfect day for bass fishing wasn't a good one. We just jumped lakes. We moved lakes. We're like, this thing is awful. It's nothing but sand. There's no structure. Absolutely no structure. And you can find structure without fish, but you'll never find fish without structure. That's how that quote went, right? So definitely a hard bottom. Spawning area within here. Large spawning area. So that SV gives us an idea of the bottom type that is prone to help them with spawning. Let's see if we can't find an area that looks like a spawning bed but isn't. Say right here. It's decently shallow within this area, and it may look like a spawning bed from the boat. But look at the bottom. It's real soft, and that softness continues. And I say soft, just kind of, play that in your head. It continues throughout here. This area, however, has a similar, one of the contour lines do eventually kind of funnel together. There's no real runoff for them. No, one of those, maybe this area would be like a multi-directional runoff, not too prominent, but the hardness promotes that spawning bed. So some guys love to fish spawning beds. I don't blame you. I don't particularly see anything wrong with it. Here's another one that's good. Here's one that's not so good. So yes, it looks like it would promote a good spawning area, but we know from the previous Google Earth image that this whole beach or this area right here is nothing but man-dumped sand. There's a little bit of hardness here. There's probably a couple of them spawning, but you're probably not going to find that bucket mouth. And you find this area here, which appears to have a funnel type area coming in, multi-directional runoff, and the hard bottom type. You can get into the different hardness layers. This one with the E2, it's really looking underneath what's already there. So for me and fellow bass fishermen, it's not necessarily something I would need. For some of you other guys, maybe you know, I don't. Some of these striper fishermen up here um, don't want to anchor on crazy hard rock. Maybe that's an instance that may be important. Um, the E1 is more representative of the bottom type that spawning areas that would be good. Um, we'll eventually get into exporting them. These you can come up here and export what you got. You can come into your layers, your individual layers, and I thought there was an export. Maybe not. I guess you got to make it in the map and then export it. It'd be nice if you can just take that composite and export it. No biggie. Hopefully I kind of covered what he was asking. I did want to say one thing. I was watching some fishing videos and they were talking about the importance of using carbon fiber or fluorocarbon leaders that help them fish and catch larger fish. And I think part of the reason they're doing that, I don't think it's necessary. I think you're using a good monofilament or a decent braid. I don't fish braid. I'm a monofilament fella. It's probably the most versatile line in my opinion. The stretch in it is very important when you get a large fish near the boat and you're talking 6 pounds and they decide to surge. A good 10-pound monofilament on a medium heavy rod will stretch enough to let them do it and not destroy the line. But they're talking about fluorocarbon leaders and how important they are, and that's because they fish the pressured areas. These areas have so much fishing pressure that every little trick in the book is necessary. But we've learned this spot here, and we're going to learn more on the next upcoming lake I'm going to do. The next one has much it has way more types of bottoms, an enormous change in bottom type throughout the entire lake. It's going to be a fun mosaic. It's going to look nice. It's going to be really cool. And I'm gonna spend more gasoline doing this than I want. Anyway, hopefully this kind of mosaic contour and hardness map kind of makes sense when you put them all together. You can layer these all together into Google Earth. I'm not going to do that today. Once we get into the next one, and we will. I did want to say before I cut this off that I work with a great group of fellas, Adapt Outdoors LLC. We take disabled individuals out fishing, and we have a lot of fun. Great group of guys. It's in Connecticut. We also do work in Massachusetts as well. So a lot of driving, a lot of fun. Always looking for volunteers, donors. Check it out. These guys are awesome. And if you have any questions or you're in the Connecticut area and you want to go fishing, hit me up. And have a good day.